Welcome to the 5th year of the Will Miller Social Justice Lecture Series. I'm Ann Lipsett and was Will's partner for 25 years. Will, my parents, and I, and a few of our friends decided that we would create a lecture series prior to Will's death so that he could be a part of its creation and purpose setting. He was, in fact, alive for the first event, Marx in Soho, a play written by Howard Zinn and performed on the UVM campus by Brian Jones, a New York actor, teacher, and social justice activist. It was a wonderful event, especially for Will. We tried to bring this remarkable performance back to campus 2 weeks ago, but regretfully, the event needed to be canceled due to the early birth of Brian's baby. Hopefully, we will bring him back in the near future to perform this play. Brian, are you here? He was going to try and come here, because he and his partner and the baby are all stuck in Vermont, where the baby got born. The lecture series was created to bring speakers to the UVM campus and the Burlington community in order to provide a continuing program of radical analysis of social, ecological, and political concerns. The series is dedicated to Will Miller, Vermont's activist philosopher and UVM professor for 35 years. Will set a courageous example in speaking truth to power. Despite how easy it might have been for him to become pessimistic, he demonstrated boundless optimism and a passion for truth. His voice was powerful, especially in encouraging other voices, those of students, staff, faculty, community members, and people from around the world, to speak up and be heard. He was always vigilant, had an extraordinary personal strength, and an unwavering commitment to the struggle against war and for social justice. He was never afraid to speak his mind, put words into action, or place himself on the line, whether before the university trustees, on a picket line, at a barricade, or in a congressional office when arrest was imminent. Will offered reasoned and insightful analysis into the origins and workings of capitalism and imperialism, giving us both a call and a vision, a call to struggle and a vision of a more just society, a society where all work is valued, where truth is not silenced but nurtured, where all are treated as equals, that is at peace with itself, and in which neither people nor resources are exploited. I want to thank our co-sponsors for helping to make this event happen, especially the UVM English Department and the James and Mary Brigham Buckham Fund, the Global Justice Ecology Project, the Vermont Workers Center, the Will Miller Green Mountain Veterans for Peace, and the local chapter of the International Socialist Organization. The other board members of the lecture series are Helen Scott, Colin Robinson, in the blue shirt over there, Ann Peterman, somewhere. She is here somewhere. Fred Magdoff, and Mike Cassidy. Hey, Fred. The work of pulling together and paying for the lecture series could not be done without generous donors from near and far. I want to thank all of you who have made donations in the past, and I encourage you to make a donation tonight in one of the containers that are being passed around at the event, or by purchasing a lecture series t-shirt. We will also send around clipboards for you to sign so we can put you on our mailing list. I want to invite you to join our Facebook page as well to help us be able to communicate with you regarding upcoming events. We're particularly interested in receiving suggestions for future topics or people to present at this lecture series. Our webpage isn't working well right now, but it will be up and running again shortly. It's easy to remember, willmiller.org. Prior to Kim and Roger's talk, you will hear from Patrick Standen, a philosophy professor at St. Mike's and at UVM and a former student of Will's. He will talk about Will the teacher and his influence on countless students in the field of philosophy. After Patrick speaks, Helen Scott will introduce our two speakers. I started a new tradition of reading a Howard Zinn essay at our last event and want to continue to read it at each of our events. Howard, who passed away recently, was an American history professor at Boston University and a powerful writer, orator, and social activist. Losing him is another great loss to our community. This poem or essay is a reminder to us that while going to lectures is important to do, to keep us current and informed, it is also important to make social justice a priority in our lives. On Getting Along in Difficult Times by Howard Zinn. You ask how I managed to stay involved and remain seemingly happy and adjusted to this awful world where the efforts of caring people pale in comparison to those who have power? It's easy. First, don't let those who have power intimidate you. No matter how much power they have, they cannot prevent you from living your life, speaking your mind, thinking independently, having relationships with people as you like. Read Emma Goldman's autobiography, Living My Life. Harassed, even imprisoned by authority, she insisted on living her life, speaking out however she felt. Second, find companions who have your values, your commitments, but who also have a sense of humor. That combination is a necessity. Third, notice how precise my advice is, that I can confidently number it, the way scientists number things. Understand that the major media will not tell you of all the acts of resistance taking place every day. The strikes, the protests, the individual acts of courage in the face of authority. Look, and you will certainly find it. For evidence of these unreported acts, and for the little you find, extrapolate from that and assume there must be 1,000 times as much as what you've already found. Fourth, note that throughout history, people have felt powerless before authority, but that at certain times, these powerless people, by organizing, acting, risking, persisting, have created enough power to change the world around them, even if only a little or briefly. Fifth, remember, those who have power and who seem invulnerable are in fact quite vulnerable. Their power depends on the obedience of others. And when those others begin withholding that obedience, begin defying authority, that power at the top turns out to be very fragile. Generals become powerless when their soldiers refuse to fight. Industrialists become powerless when their workers leave their jobs or occupy the factories. Sixth, when we forget the fragility of power imposed from above, we become astounded when it crumbles in the face of rebellion. We have had many such surprises in our time, both in the United States and in other countries. Seventh, don't look for a moment of total triumph. Set it as an ongoing struggle. See it as an ongoing struggle, with victories and defeats, but consciousness of people growing over the long run. So you need patience, persistence, and you need to understand that even when you don't win, there is fun and fulfillment in the fact that you have been involved with other good people in something worthwhile. Okay, 7 pieces of profound advice should be enough. Howard Zinn. As a side note, in regards to Howard Zinn, I want to tell you about an event that is titled A Celebration of Howard Zinn, which is taking place on April 23rd at 7 p.m. at Contois Auditorium in Burlington. There'll be a screening of the film You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train at the event, which is a documentary about Howard's life. Filmmaker Deb Ellis will also be there. Following the film will be a reading of some of Howard's work. If you want to know more about this event, you can talk with Colin Robinson, who's now right over there, or check out the Peace and Justice Center's website. Before our speakers begin, we have Jonathan Kasem from the Vermont Workers Center to talk about local organizing around the U.S. Social Forum.
So thanks everyone. Thanks to the Will Miller Social Justice Lecture Series for having us. I will be very brief because there's a bunch of other speakers. The Vermont Workers Center, for folks who aren't familiar with it, is a local community organization based in Burlington, but with members throughout the state. We've been around for about 12 years. We really started as a workers' rights organization and fighting for livable wages and health care and fair treatment at work. We quickly came to realize that our local struggles in our workplaces and in our communities couldn't be solved just in our workplaces and in our communities, right? That we're connected with these international systems that Anne mentioned, imperialism and capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy and so forth, that make it, while we can make small gains, that we can't get to where our vision of a just, economically just Vermont if we don't connect our local struggles with the international struggles and the international perspective. I really like that Howard Zinn piece where he talked about the resistance happens everywhere. And so our orientation is that we need to take that resistance that's happening everywhere in every neighborhood out around here, in every workplace, and connect it to an internationalist vision. The reason I'm here, everyone sort of knows that on some level, is not to tell you that, but the place that we think is the most important sort of space to gather with the like-minded individuals that Howard Zinn talked about in the coming period is an event that's going to be happening in Detroit in June called the U.S. Social Forum. The U.S. Social Forum is expected to gather 20,000 social justice activists, trade unionists, women's activists, indigenous peoples, and so forth, from grassroots organizations throughout the U.S. and internationally. We think that's really the place that it's going to be a really powerful coming together. This is the second U.S. Social Forum. The first one in Atlanta in 2007 was really transformative for everyone that we brought to that. So we are going to be organizing delegations of vans. We had hoped for buses turned out to be a little expensive beyond our means, but they'll be leaving from Burlington, and it's June 22nd through the 26th. We'll be leaving on the 21st, sorry, I'm easily distracted, obviously. And so if folks, I will stay around to hear all the speakers, so if folks have any questions about that and want to grab me afterwards. But I will, again, we think, you sort of start with your own individual issues. This has been sort of our experience organizationally and a lot of our members' experience with your own lack of health care and need for livable wages. And then you realize that there's a system that's keeping you down, that's keeping you from getting that. And then we realize that once we have the systems, we need liberation from the systems. We realize as we talk with each other and with people from other sectors and with people from other nations that our liberation is bound up with other people's liberation, and we need a vision, a transformative vision, to even get the little things that we need in our day-to-day lives. It's increasingly clear we need a transformative vision, and we think that the U.S. Social Forum is a really key place for the movement in the U.S. to come together to discuss that. So thanks again, and I'll be around afterwards if anyone wants to ask me about logistics and stuff.
I didn't realize you all had a note on your seat that talked about this. I could have left that out. Patrick, you want to come up?
Thank you. Hello. When Anne asked me to say a few words about Will, I was deeply honored. For few of my professors at the university or even later in graduate school had a longer lasting and more deep impact on my education than Will Miller. I've chosen tonight to focus on Will as a teacher of philosophy because that's how I first came to know Will. Many of his colleagues, his friends, his family, comrades, students have taken the opportunity to remember Will and his unwavering commitment to social justice. And it would be foolish indeed to try to separate the two, Will as teacher and Will as activist, because he was inextricably bound up as one. He did both. And if ever anyone has ever succeeded in uniting theory and practice, it was Will. To that end, I first came to know Will Miller as a teacher in an upper-level philosophy class here at the university. It was a class in American philosophy, appropriately enough. His encyclopedic knowledge and thorough grasp of the many traditions of American philosophy were, to say the least, inspiring. But there was something else present, too, something about Will, something that set Will apart from all of his colleagues at the university. And that was his accessibility, his approachability, his geniality, his friendliness. One felt a great sense of comfort with Will. His warm and conversational style as a teacher and as a person always encouraged friendly dialogue, robust discussion, and even spirited debate, and sometimes even more than spirited debate. Whether he was describing the intricacies of C.S. Peirce or Jonathan Edwards or Hosea Royce or John Dewey, he did it in a masterful and yet entirely accessible manner, a manner that I would later take very seriously and try to adapt and adopt in my own teaching as a professor of philosophy. Yet there was always present this trenchant political critique too, as when the time he taught us how UVM had refused admittance to John Dewey after he had graduated as undergraduate to do graduate study here at the university. Johns Hopkins gain, our loss, I guess. In teaching Peirce the subject of his 1969 doctoral thesis titled C.S. Person on the Philosophy of History at the University of Illinois, Will reached a level of enthusiasm and profundity still lacking in academia at times. He got really enthusiastic, and I'm sure if you ever had him as a student or knew him personally, you can visualize how excited he would be about ideas and philosophy. To be a young Vermont undergraduate and to see that, and to see the seriousness with which he took and grabbed ideas was really very inspiring. And I know it struck other students just as profoundly as it would me. And I should say that in part, my desire to teach philosophy stemmed from Will and the model that he created. C.S. Peirce viewed truth, much as Will did, as an essential component of a democratic community's struggle against prejudice and bias in its efforts to obtain certainty. Will embodied this practice and reached for conceptual certainty in his critiques of power, of capital, and of the very university itself. In this sense, Will's educational pedagogy, as well as his unwavering commitment to social justice, were outgrowths of what I would call his neo-Peircean pragmatism. Whether inside or outside the classroom, Will was always motivated by how our ideas produce actions. This pedagogy, his educational philosophy, buttressed Will's unflagging courage to speak truth to power, even when it was unpopular. Some years later, the department here at the University of Vermont that Will so selflessly served for 35 years was honored by the Philosophical Gourmet's designation of being ranked the #1 undergraduate program in philosophy in the United States. This didn't come to much of a surprise to we few philosophy majors who knew that such an award came in part from the dedicated teaching of Will Miller. So let us pause to remember Will in this great social justice series lecture and the great ideas that they bring forward in words similar to those used to memorialize another great revolutionary philosopher, whom Engels said of, he sought not only to interpret the world, but to change it, and honor Will's legacy, which was based in part on the belief that teaching was one of the most effective ways to effect progressive and positive social change. Thank you.
That was wonderful. So the devastating earthquake that struck Haiti in January really put Haiti at the center of mainstream discourse in the US. But the coverage, I think, has all too often presented a natural disaster without historical or social context, representing Haiti as a failed state and a disaster area, while presenting the US and other world powers as saviors of the situation. At this time, much of the attention has dropped off, though we still periodically hear about high-profile events such as the International Donors Conference or, most lately, the visit by Michelle Obama. But what is sorely missing most of the time in this commentary is the voice of ordinary Haitians as subjects of their own destiny. And this evening we've invited two longtime Haiti activists and journalists who write for Haiti Liberte, the weekly newspaper published in Port-au-Prince and New York City. And they're going to set the record straight for us. Each is going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions and discussion and comments. In the spirit of the Will Miller Lecture Series, which pledges to support those who speak truth to power in the name of social justice, we appreciate the dedication of both of our speakers to bring a much-needed Haitian perspective and to build solidarity with Haitians in the US. So please help me welcome our two guests, Roger LeDuc and Kim Ives.
Thank you very much, Helen. Good evening. I didn't prepare anything tonight, and I'm sort of glad because you sometimes want to get the feel of what the audience is. I've given a couple of talks lately on to university audiences. The most recent was in the university front was a couple of weeks ago in Scotland. There was a conference on Haiti's connection to Hegel's thought. And there's a thesis which has been put out that Hegel's notion of master and servant, I mean, there's some debate about the German translation here, but was it informed by the Haitian Revolution, which was happening more or less at the same time in 1804? There's quite a bit of debate still among the philosophers involved, but I think it's certain we can state that Haiti's influence on history is seminal. This was, as I think we all know, the first and last successful slave revolution in history. And yet, this is one of the most, we could say, neglected revolutions and misunderstood in the world. Even just across the way in revolutionary Cuba, in the Museum to the Revolutions, you have exhibits on the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution and the Cuban Revolution, but the Haitian Revolution is absent. A huge oversight. And this was so seminal. And it's interesting as we talk tonight about the upcoming social forums, and we see these happening around the world. There's one going in Madrid in May, the one in Detroit. This is a new movement we see, or I could say a new paradigm in resistance of many different movements coming together. Environmental movements merging with unions, merging with immigrant forces, all coming together in these large conclaves, if you will, and devising a resistance strategy, and sometimes extremely effective ones, as we saw in Seattle. But really, again, the precursor to all this, in many ways, was Haiti. I mean, if you look at the Haitian Revolution, it was very different from the only other revolution that preceded it in this hemisphere, in the US, where you had basically slave owners get together and devise a top-down response to the British Empire. This was really a bottom-up revolution. It was one coming up from the slaves, and it resulted in the first truly free country, one where everybody was equal. So I think we have to really look to Haiti as some kind of historical icebreaker. It has really been, in many ways, the precursor to a lot of the movements that we see. And if we look not only at 1804, but we can look at the resistance that Haiti gave to the marine interventions that were happening throughout the world at the time. Haiti came with the first guerrilla resistance, the CACOs. They were the first, and that's where the U.S., in fact, devised a lot of its counterinsurgency tactics that were later used in Vietnam. The strategic Hamlet, that was devised in Haiti. Aerial bombings, devised in Haiti. And if we look at, I could say, the beginnings of the results of these large confluences of movements in the form of, say, Hugo Chavez's election, or Evo Morales's, or Correa's in Ecuador, other countries. The first country where this happened, Haiti, 1990. that was the first time that the U.S. policy of rigged elections, what they called, election engineering, where they would go into a country, because they realized the old paradigm of having the general or the dictator in place was not working. It was creating too many Che Guevaras, too many revolutions. It wasn't the right formula. So they said, okay, we're going to work something else. We're going to put the soldiers back in their barracks, and we're going to have a guy who's elected. If he gets in trouble, we're going to come in, not with soldiers from the barracks, but with the UN. We'll have our own international peacekeepers come in and take over. And so Haiti was the first country to foil this when they came with their selected candidate, because they figured it was going to work just like elections here. Whoever spends the most wins. Well, it didn't work like that in Haiti. They had Marc Bazin, a former World Bank economist, banker, who they brought into Haiti, had prepped him, years were spent, and they spent about $34 million on his electoral campaign, and he went up against a poor neighborhood priest, Father Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who had a campaign war chest of $500,000. So he was being outspent by, about 68 to 1. And I remember those huge rallies of people coming down the hills, just rivers of people coming down into a huge ocean at the bottom of people. And they'd be singing, C'est pas l'argent, non, c'est volontaire, oui, which means it's not for money we're out here, it's voluntarily. And so he handily won the election. They called off the vote counting when he won 67%. They didn't want it to be too embarrassed with a 90 or 99% win. So he came to power, but then again, Haiti, the icebreaker, had the first international peacekeeping deployment in this hemisphere, and remains holding that honor of the only militarily occupied country in this hemisphere. Well, what happened on January 12th of this year was really a revolution. It was funny when I was talking at the University of London a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said it was God's revolution. In a way, it's true. I mean, this was the effect. If the purpose of a revolution is to overthrow the state, that's what happened. The state of Haiti was destroyed. Not just the state, but even its symbols. The palace was down, all the ministries went down, all the symbols of power, and even the churches went down. And the symbolism of this, it was not lost on people. They saw this as a clear message. It was interesting. In fact, the progressive bourgeois activist Antoine Ismery, who was actually a second generation Palestinian descent, who was the guy who put up the $500,000 for Aristide's campaign. His store, if you drive along the main drag, Avenue Jean-Jacques Dessalines, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Roger, as you go down there, all the stores falling down, all the buildings, down, down, down. Ismery's store, fine. Nothing happened to it. Even to a die-hard atheist, this gives pause. In any case, in a way, what we had was a revolution. And so it's not surprising that we see the response that the empire has given. When I was flying down with the Democracy Now! Crew, about 4 days after the quake, we had to go through, this was the beginning, because the takeover of Haiti was almost immediate. the U.S. came in immediately and took over the airport, the country. This is what militaries do. You're going to take over country, you get the airport. That's what they did. They came in, they took over the airport, and it was very hard to get in. We, of course, if you're part of the embedded media, the CNN, ABC, CBS, okay, you got to pass in. You're working for the Pentagon practically. But here, we had to really jump through a bunch of hoops and come with all kinds of lies. This isn't going to be published too widely, I hope, to get in, to say we were bringing medical supplies, blah, 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 just so we could get the private plane we'd found to come in and land. And what was the first thing we saw as we started to fly over Haiti? Coast Guard planes with their bright orange wings flying along the coast with a bunch of boats, just like a little cordon around the country. They'd bottled it up. They had to keep this place quarantined because not only refugees coming, but we needed to know what was going to happen on the ground. There was no government. We had to come in and fill the void. 20,000 U.S. troops injected like that overnight. I mean, we can see the power of that military machine to come in, which is in such sharp contrast to what was happening with countries like Cuba, Venezuela, and from halfway around the globe, China. These were, in fact, the first countries on the ground. China, from halfway around the globe, were the first ones there with search and rescue teams who were coming in to help pull people out of the rubble. But what was the U.S. doing? They weren't there. You didn't see these soldiers out in the street. No. They were hunkered down at the airport, guarding these mountains of relief aid, which was sitting there at the airport while people were starving and dying. And I remember one of the doctors, we stayed at this little religious house where sort of progressives go to stay, you know, when they're having delegations and so forth. And there were doctors who were flying in from all over the country, from Denver, from Maine, from California, Washington State, etc. And one of them remarked the same thing we had noticed coming in. He said, wow, there were so many guns they were bringing in. And he said a thing that we've repeated often on Democracy Now! What we need here is not guns, we need gauze. And so this kind of became the summation of the irony of this moment. Here they were coming, basically clamping down and putting in their troops. So this has, I think most of you have probably read and seen the critiques along these lines, that this has been a complete militarization of relief. They've come in with their soldiers. They left the people to dig through the rubble, dig out their families from underneath the rubble with their fingernails, with flashlights, with little hammers. I mean, it was amazing to see how the Haitian people mobilized themselves to bring about their own salvation in this crisis. And meanwhile, you know, the U.S. and UN were driving around on their big tanks, pointing their guns at them as if, you know, they were a threat. And this is, of course, really the image they project of Haiti. You know, this place, oh, they're going to riot, it's going to be mayhem, oh my God, security, we've got to put it in place. And of course, they kept repeating that as we drove on the road out to Petit Gouave and Léogane. They were saying, oh, well, we can't go in there yet because we haven't set up security. We haven't set up security. Well, I have given this story on many occasions of, we watched this at the house, Matthew 25, where we were staying, where a truckload of food arrived unannounced in the middle of the night. There was a guy having his leg amputated on the kitchen table when it arrived, and yet they called the local popular organization. The people, the guys, there was about 25 of them, they put on their blue t-shirts, they went out, they set up a perimeter, and they lined up about 700 people who were camped out in the soccer field behind the house, and they distributed the food. No problem. They did it, and without any blue helmets there pointing guns or Marines yelling orders in English. I mean, that was the absurdity of it. To arrive at the general hospital and to have the Marines, actually it was the 82nd Airborne, arrived about 10 minutes before us. They said, "Can we come in?" "Oh, no, we're locked down here." I said, "What do you mean you're locked down? It's a hospital." He goes, "On their orders. I'm sorry." I said, "Well, that's ridiculous. We got to come in. There's about 600 people right behind me. They need to get in." And they were all standing back there. They need to get in for services, of course, and a lot of them were bringing food to people because the hospital's kitchen was out of order. So, I mean, it was collapsed. And I'm sorry, got my orders. So we went in a side door. We went to see the guy who was running it, a guy, Evans Lyons. I mean, yeah, these guys. And we said, your hospital's locked down. He goes, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yeah." And we said, yeah. So we got it down, and they opened it up, finally. But the soldiers had to stand there in the driveway with their arms at the ready, with people sort of filing through them, So it's this absurd notion of security, and the juxtaposition would really be what was called the Hospital de la Paix, La Paz, which was the Cuban-run hospital, just down the road on Delma 33. I mean, you walk in here, it was a model of order, serene in the midst of this chaos. The guys going around, no showboating, no, yelling. They're focused. They're going about their business. There were already 800 Cuban doctors in Haiti. They've been deployed there for the past 16 years. That was Aristide's parting shot when he was pushed out by the U.S. He said, "Okay, we're going to open relations with Cuba," which had been cut off since Fidel had come in. And the Cubans brought over another 1,500 doctors with what they call the Henry Reeve Brigade. Henry Reeve was an American doctor with the Jose Marti. He fought and died. They brought these 1,500 doctors. They came from all over Latin America, Panamanians, Hondurans, Bolivians, Argentinians, and a lot of Africans from Mali, Western Sahara, Senegal. They had people from Lebanon, Turkey. So a real internationalist corps. I mean, this was like the Lincoln Brigade from the Spanish Civil War. I mean, it was really, but here were these fighters for medical health. And they went and they were living in tents. A number of Americans were there too. We interviewed them. They were brought down by the Pastors for Peace, Lucius Walker. Many of you are probably familiar with his work. He has been doing these delegations, and a lot of young people from disadvantaged communities in the U.S. go to ILAM, the Cuban school, and work in Haiti, and work in their neighborhoods, but they came down to work in Haiti, 8 of them. So you have this juxtaposition, really, and I think that's what we have to see in this icebreaker nation, Haiti. We're seeing right now, as this revolution unfolds, God's revolution created by this earthquake, a confrontation for the first time between the North's machine, spearheaded by the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the South, which has now developed these new fronts. The most vanguard of them is the ALBA front. That's 8 nations, Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Cuba, Grenadines, a few others. And just to show you to juxtapose the response of these two countries, on January 25th, 13 days after the earthquake, they both had conferences, one in Montreal, the other in Caracas. At the Montreal conference, they essentially had a meeting to plan another meeting. They didn't do anything. Some people had said, shall we put the question of debt on the, oh, no, we can't talk about that. We have to wait on that. But the same day in Caracas, the ALBA met. And they came up with $100 million of aid, doctors, fuel, and Venezuela immediately canceled its debt. It said to Haiti, Haiti, you no longer have any debt to Venezuela. On the contrary, Chavez said, Venezuela has a debt to Haiti. And what did he mean by that? He meant that it was Haiti, it was Pétion and Dessalines who had provided the boats, the printing presses, the guns, the support to Bolivar and Miranda in their struggle to free the continent. So Haiti was really the touchstone of those revolutions. It was the touchstone of the free hemisphere, of the war against colonialism. And now Chavez said, it's time for us to pay back the Haitian people. So really that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this alliance of southern countries with governments which have emerged from, we could say, social forums of different movements, peasant movements and unions, and et cetera, who have come together, brought leaders in, and who are now, for the first time, challenging the world order that was set up at Bretton Woods after the Second World War. And are saying, okay, you don't have to just rely on the imperialists. We're here. You're brothers. We're going to work with you, brothers and sisters. There's another front called the UNASUR. That's all of the Latin American countries, South American countries except for French Guinea. They came with $300 million that they offered Haiti. It wasn't until March 31st with this much ballyhooed conference at the UN that they came with anything. That, when I say they, I mean the imperialist alliance. Venezuela's debt, by the way, that it canceled on the 26th, 13 days after, was $300 million almost. $295 million. That's almost a third of what Haiti owed. It took the Inter-American Development Bank until 2 months later, till March 31st, to say that it was working on and it was going to get its $495 million that Haiti owes canceled. But 479. But there's still a lot more. Haiti had 1.3 billion in debt. And, you know, this is a no-brainer. It's still being dragged along. The Congress just yesterday, this past week, said that we're going to push in the IMF to have the U.S. lead the way. The quote was, "The U.S. will lead the way in debt forgiveness to Haiti." Well, it's a little too late for that. Venezuela has already played that role. So they're still talking about it. And essentially this conference, to close, because I think I'm closing in probably on 20 minutes, is a lot of bluff, a lot of posturing. You've probably heard the figures. They came. They said the Haitian government asked for $4 billion in assistance. And the conference came up with $5.3 billion for the next 18 months. $5.3 billion. Well, the first thing so this was a great success. Hooray, everybody claps. Okay. The first thing to note here, and there's an interesting article this week for those of you who read French in Haiti Liberte, the paper that we write for. It's about the figures of the aid, and it points out that while they're talking about $5.3 billion for Haiti, they don't mention that this occupation of Haiti has cost over the past 6 years $3.6 billion. $3.6 billion. There's a couple of other interesting statistics, such as the average cost of a soldier in the U.S. Anybody know what it is? $36,000. Can you imagine that? $36,000 to risk your life for a bunch of bankers. And then the cost, the salary of your average Haitian worker, if you're lucky to have a job, is about $60 a month. So that means it would take a Haitian 50 years to earn what a U.S. soldier earns in 1 year. So yeah, there's some interesting juxtapositions about that. So can you imagine if we took all that money, which is being sent for the deployment just of the soldiers to Haiti, that costs $468 million. Can you imagine if we just took that $468 million, $500 million, and just gave it to the Haitian people? See what they could come up with. But instead, what's happening is it's going to these NGOs and being funneled in through them. To close, essentially, you've had this military occupation reinforced, set in place because the state has gone down. And now comes the coup de grace, the taking over, and I think Roger is going to parse this for you a little bit more. They've taken over the everything. The Parliament, the House of Deputies in Haiti just ratified this. For the next 18 months, Haiti will essentially be run by the World Bank. The World Bank will take these projects, send them to an interim commission, which is majority foreigners, people from the donor nations. They will approve the projects, and then they will be implemented by the Haitian government under the supervision, again, of these foreign donors, because the Haitian government is so corrupt. And they themselves, they don't have corruption. Halliburton, DynCorp, Brown and Root, no, that's not corruption. That's just business as usual. And of course, this is what it's all about. We the taxpayers, are giving our money, essentially we're giving a bailout to these pillars of our war economy. Halliburton, DynCorp, Brown and Root, these are the countries which come and rebuild nations after we bond them into the Stone Age. In this case, with an earthquake. We are not giving a direct bailout TARP fund as we gave to the banks, but we're doing it through the circuitous. We give it supposedly to Haiti, and Haiti is going to give it back to these corporations to spend billions of dollars supposedly rebuilding Haiti, but along the lines that the World Bank dictates. It's what Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador, said on January 29th. He called it donor imperialism. He said what they give with their right hand, they take back with their left. And he said, this is what we have to fight. We need a support, a reconstruction, and aid based on solidarity, compassion, and human values, not on profit. Now I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good evening. I have to say thanks for the good folk who decided to invite me here to talk and give it the Haitian spin. Our honorary Haitian here already did much of that, so I'll try not to repeat him too much. It's very difficult to stay focused within this Haitian thing because there is so much to be said, and all of it seems essential. That's indispensable. You have to talk about this one and that one because you feel like you're not giving people the whole picture. I always try to start my presentation by saying how I don't want to be immodest to state that I'm talking for the Asian people, but I cannot escape from this role in a sense. The outpouring of support and solidarity that the Haitians have received, in a sense, I know it's paradoxical to say that it's been a blessing. It's been this big earthquake, this big fault, destroyed Haiti, and in parallel there is this big fault of love and sympathy for Haiti that for the first time in my life, this sense of universal solidarity, of mankind being one, brotherhood and sisterhood, I've felt that. And many Haitians have felt that. So I'm here tonight to say thank you, because I know some of you, your parents and your folk, have sent money, and I've called some Haitians to say that you cared. How is the family? That'll help a lot, believe me. So we're at a point now past the Kim has done a good job of showing how things had happened at first, how security was uppermost in the minds and in the plans of the empire, headed by the United States. But a lot of them are united in the empire, even though at first France did voice some concern just because of rivalry. Are the United States here to help, or are they here to occupy, when they saw that it was going to be about 20,000 soldiers that were sent to Haiti? But now you don't hear any complaint about them because they've decided to share the pie together and give the sense that they are united in saving Haiti. So what you have right now, after the first phase where security was achieved, the military phase, because of course there is a chance that Preval, after the fiasco, after the disaster that he presented to the world, glaring absence of his government, no reaction, no talking to the people, no expression of sympathy for his people, no sense of direction, no sense that he even cared. Of course, the Haitian people will be more than justified to go and uproot him and send him where he's supposed to be. So that's part of the reason why the 20,000 Marines were sent to Haiti. And of course, the bourgeoisie of Haiti, they used to refer to them as morally corrupt. They even have an acronym for that, the MCE, morally corrupt elite. They weren't feeling too safe either when people's houses were being destroyed and they had nowhere to go for food, water, and medication. That explains also the 20,000. But now we're at a different phase. It's not security in terms of military interest. It's security in terms of economic interest. And the government of Haiti presented March 31st at the United Nations conference in New York what they call the Action Plan for National Recovery and Development of Haiti. And I want to give you a flavor of what this is. Because this is where your money, the money that you sent to Haiti, that's what the money is being spent on. That's the program they've developed with your money in your name. So it's kind of very complicated, but I'll try to do my best to tell you what exactly they want to do. Because the stakes are very high now. The stakes with Haiti are very high. Is Haiti going to be destroyed by the next natural disaster? Is the population going to rise and organize itself into a revolution and just swipe away the old corrupt system? Is neoliberalism going to win while it's been defeated in Latin America, at least temporarily? So a lot is at stake here. You have the foreign powers, you have the Haitian bourgeoisie, you have the masses, and you have the physical potential disaster that could happen in a few months because the hurricane season is here. So this is real. There is no joke. Everything they've done, you can judge through whatever I've just spoke, to the prism of those elements that I've just spoke. This is very serious and they understand it. That's why 20,000 Marines, that's why you have an action plan, that's why you had about 12 conferences in March alone on Haiti. You had conferences in Brussels, France, Martinique, Guadeloupe. You had conferences in Montreal, in New York, in Haiti itself. They did a splendid job of showing the world that they were inclusive. They were getting everybody heard. Of course, it's just a show. But if you read the MSM, the mainstream media, they've been successful of presenting that they have included everybody. Of course, they haven't included the main actors, the Haitian masses. So this is what the Action Plan for National Recovery claims to be its vision. I'm going to just read you some fiction. Please pay attention. Haiti is supposed to become an emerging country by 2030. When they talk about emerging country, of course they're talking about country like Brazil, Venezuela, Mexico, countries who are coming out of underdevelopment and trying to, be a developed, industrialized country. They propose to do this in 20 years with 11, maybe $15 billion. The Haitian diaspora sends about $2 billion at home every year. So for people who think that $15 billion is such a big sum of money, much could be made with the $2 billion that the Haitian community sends home. So the vision is that emerging country by 2030, fair, just, united, and friendly society in harmony with its environment and culture. Diversified, strong, dynamic, competitive. Universal access to basic education, mastery of qualifications. Unitary state guaranteeing the implementation of laws and the interests of people. If that's not revolution, folks, what is? Revolution by the United States, France, Canada, for Haiti. We know where we are when they tell things like that. What they decided was that the program is incredible. Territorial building, that means road, urbanism, watershed, economic rebuilding, agriculture, energy, investment in the private sector, the energy and involvement of the diaspora into the Haitian economy, social rebuilding, health, education, social protection, housing, institutional rebuilding, because everything, as Kim just explained to you, has been destroyed, which is now they have to rebuild not only the buildings, but democracy, the central administration, and justice and security, which only means Haitian National Police. That's what they mean by justice and security, not more than that. My brother-in-law went to Haiti and stated that it's as if an army had descended upon Haiti and decided to destroy every government building and every institution and explodes it. Church, justice, police, etc., etc. The program goes even further. They have a macroeconomic program and they have targets. Poverty rate in the next 15 years, the next 5 years, some of it. Inflation, balance of payments, jobs, growth, budget, and taxation, foreign exchange. All of this is going to happen very soon with Haiti, with those $15 billion. So anybody who's been following the news, who's done any measure of analysis and thinking about development knows that this is just plain bull. No country can be developed in 20 years when you've spent the last 2 centuries making sure that it's been underdeveloped, making sure that every program that you have supported for Haiti goes towards its underdevelopment, economic, social, cultural, otherwise. So we know when we're being selling a bill of goods. This is not why this is being written. Let's go further. So how are they going to organize this? They have 3 big phases in terms of time for Haiti. You have the first phase of emergency. You have a second phase for the next 18 months. And then you have a long, quote unquote, long term for the next 10 years. First phase of emergency simply means that they have to put people on the tent, provide water, provide medication, food, and make sure that the year budget, this 2010-2011 budget, is subsidized enough for the state administration to be able to meet certain of its obligations. That's what it means. The second phase is a phase of 18 months. That phase of 18 months, they already have 2 institutions, because that's how they've divided this. For each period, they have institutions, one on the side of the finance, the other on the side of the executive administrative, to rule Haiti. the first emergency, they had the platform for budgetary aid. They have a bunch of businessmen and some of the usual suspects. In Bank of Inter-American Development, the United Nations, World Bank, and some private sectors. Of course, some of the NGOs. For that second phase of the 18 months, they have what they call a multi-donor fiduciary fund. I checked that word before I came to talk to you here. Fiduciary means organization and formulation of programs and projects. And then after you formulate all of this, you make sure that it gets executed. I don't mean killed, that's what it should be, but it gets executed. Okay, this is the finance part. They have what they call the Temporary Committee for Rebuilding Haiti. That's for the next 18 months. In parallel to the finance, there is an executive one. The temporary, they call it the HICR. That's how it comes in the United Nations text. It's the Haiti Interim Committee for Reconstruction of Haiti. That's what it is. So Kim already told you that, and I think you did, that they had like 11 Haitians or Haitian organizations and then 11 foreign agents organizations. Both of these are supposed to rule Haiti. There will be 2 commissioners. One of them is Mr. Clinton. The other is the Prime Minister of Haiti. I don't have to tell you of those 2 people who will be the real governor of Haiti. Because Mr. Clinton is the next president. He's not going to make a trip to Haiti just to listen to Mr. Bellerive tell him what to do. And his wife is the Secretary of State. So what they decide to do is, like, they already set up the law. They already put it down in law. They amended the September 9th, 2008 law on state of emergency. They decided to extend it for the 18 months, which means that Mr. Préval, the president of Haiti, whose term was supposed to be over in 2011, will remain in power. The same political class will remain in power, and they will be assisted, quote unquote, by Mr. Clinton and the others, and they will be told what to do. By the way, that HICR for the next 18 months is composed of the United Nations, again, the usual suspects, World Bank, IADB, the NGOs, OAS, France, all of this. They had this program already set for Haiti before the natural disaster. In a sense, the disaster is a godsend for the foreign powers, for Canada, France, and the United States especially. What they wanted to do in 30 years, they can now do in 10. And they can do it because they can say that they are justified, because the Haitian government has shown itself to be totally absent and incompetent and incapable of responding to a crisis. After the 18 months, the HICR will lend its role to the Haiti Development Agency. The Haiti Development Agency is supposed to be totally Haitian. But guess what? Remember, we had 2 sides. We had the finance and the executive, just like you had for the 18 months. For the next 10 years, you have, the United Nations likes to use this, we have an instrument called the Multi-Donor Trust Fund. That Multi-Donor Trust Fund, if I ask any one of you now, you can guess who is going to be in there? the Inter-American Development Bank, the United Nations, and the World Bank. They're going to rule Haiti financially, which means they're going to rule Haiti. They're going to determine what's the program, what are the projects, how to coordinate them, and how to execute them. And they're going to do this in coordination with the private sector in Haiti, and they're going to do it with the NGOs, and they're going to do it with all the other partners that have not been named in the program. Believe me, there are other partners that have not been named in the program. So it's obvious that a lot of people have not been named in this program. A lot of essential people from Haiti have not been named. But before I go into that, let me share with you my impression when I read this. It's pretty clear. Anybody who goes into the United Nations site and check for action plan for recovery and try and read it, it's very hurried. It was put together very quickly because there are a lot of documents that they put in there. It's repetitive. What's supposed to happen in the emergency phase happens again in the 18 months, happens again in the 10-year phase. It's very vaguely written, which means when some document like this is written very vaguely, I mean, you have freedom to interpret it anywhere, any way you want, especially when you have power to interpret it. And it wasn't written by Haitians. The first page of the document says, this is a Haitian proposal. That's what it was supposed to be. Why are you protesting? Nobody asked you. It was pretty clear that it's not being written by Haitians. And Haiti is referred throughout the document in the third person. It's not we're doing this. Haiti is supposed to do that. Somebody who brought you this and said, this is what you're supposed to do. So what's missing from this? What's missing is the contribution of Cuba and Venezuela. What's missing? Haitian economy. Not economy by assistance. This has never worked anywhere. I dare anybody to tell me of any small underdeveloped country that has been developed by foreign powers. The Marshall Plan succeeded, quote unquote, because it dealt with countries who were already industrialized before the war, whether it's Japan or Germany. Japan actually had the best fighting airplane, the Zero, built by Mitsubishi before the war. This was not an underdeveloped country. People think that the United States and the Allies went and developed Japan. Same for Germany, to a lesser extent Italy. So that's what's missing. What is missing, and this is, for me, this is the saddest point. Haiti just went through a natural disaster that's pretty much destroyed its economy and destroyed Port-au-Prince, Léogane, Kai, and Jacmel physically. There isn't a Haitian FEMA in this whole plan. It's common sense that after you provide people with food, medication, water, someplace to live, you would say to yourself, what do I do to prepare for the hurricane season? Because if it doesn't happen this year, it will happen next year. It's every year. For you to talk about some subcommittee in every little town to respond to the crisis and not have a Haitian agency for at least the next 18 months in the second phase, This is criminal. So the event was a natural disaster. You are not responding to the event. I mean, it's as simple as that. So what is your objective? What is it that you want to achieve? If you don't want to help the Haitians build an organism, an instrument to respond to the next physical, natural disaster that's going to the rain, the flood, if it's not another earthquake, when is the Haitian government going to learn? As its neighbor to the northwest, Cuba has done that for like 20-some years now, successfully every year. Sometimes displace 1 million people from one side of the island to the next. And then you hear the news, 4 Cubans died. 2,000 Haitians died. When the Cubans bore the brunt of the hurricane and the Haitians only had some floods. This hasn't been done. And for me, this is not the key, but it is the red flag that indicate what the intention is there. What's the goal is there. Whose interest is being served. I don't have much time. Let me hurry and say what I think we need to do. Because this explosion of Haiti's image over the mainstream media and other media also, more progressive. Something has to come out of this. As I said, it is a godsend for the foreign powers because they get to accelerate and deepen their intervention and the program that they already set out to achieve. It can also be a godsend. I know it's paradoxical, I know it's ironic, but it can also be a godsend for the progressive side. Because this big emotional turmoil, this rise in consciousness all over the world among progressive humanitarians, we can build on that. What we need to do, a few things that we need to do. We need to develop public forums throughout the country, just like we're having forums here. Let the Haitian people speak. Let them talk about what they need. They have demonstrated in the first few days a sense of solidarity, resiliency, and love for one another, and order. It took the Haitians like 5 or 7 days to start looting. And we're talking about misery. Believe me, there is abject misery there. That shows that these people can be organized and fend for themselves. So we need public forums to ask for jobs, to ask for security. And we need public forums to displace the political class, because there's been a failure there. Political class of Haiti is a failure. Not just the government, the legislative is a failure. The opposition to the government is a failure. That's the political system that's dominating Haiti now, and that's being assisted by the foreign powers, by the empire. But not just them. Us progressive also failed. Because our absence was also glaring. When the government is not there to say anything, we should have been capable to fill the void, to talk to the people and take the role. We couldn't do that. Something is wrong. So what I'm saying, the public forums should build into a democratic, popular, national movement. I know we have our little parties, and we have our organizations, and we have the just line, we are right, the others are not. This is what we're facing now. None of us little chapels can really solve this. We need a large movement, let's look south to Bolivia. And we'll see a national democratic indigenous movement where people are claiming the lands and the country back. That's what we need to do. Within that movement, we can build 10 parties, can build 20 parties, but we have a movement. Because what we're facing is too big, too powerful, too learned, too experienced for small parties of 15, 20, 30, 100, including nephews, aunts, and sisters, to face. We cannot do it. We have to break this ideological, how could I say it, balkanization. These little groups, we have to pass that. You can stay within your groups, but join a larger movement. And this is how we can turn this around. This is, if we had that, it would have built a Haitian protection corps, a civil protection corps. By the way, there is a professor, an American professor called Robert McGuire. He teaches at Trinity Washington College. And the first thing he proposed was for a civil protection corps that would be able, with that kind of money that we have for assistance throughout the world, to provide hundreds and thousands of jobs within the youth of Haiti. Give them jobs to build their own communities and country. And this would be the first phase of stimulating the economy of Haiti. We have to get out of the beggar dependency, being mendicant, always begging. Haitian institutions and governments are always begging. It's time we get out of this. And if we make our attempt to do it, we can join the other countries in the area that have done much to stop the tide of neoliberalism in Latin America. On the other side, the program they have for Haiti now is a rollback of the movement of Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, who are trying to stem the tide. They're trying with Honduras, Haiti, and now they really start to work on Lugo in Paraguay to reclaim the terrain that they've lost in those countries. So Haiti is either going the way to Honduras, the way of Honduras, when they kick Zelaya out, or Haiti is going to turn the tide. But we need a national, democratic, popular movement for that. I'll stop right here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you both. Fantastic. So we have some time for questions, and our speakers have agreed to field some questions. I also want to say that we welcome comments, keep them brief so that more people can speak, and announcements about upcoming activist events that people can get involved in. So I'll take a few comments and questions and then throw it back to our speakers, and then take a few more. Yes?
I've got two questions. If you look at a world, and you both touch the heart and further confirm what many of us, we the people, are starting to appreciate about disaster capitalism, economic hitmen, and what's happening. So my one question is, or I guess the first question is, these global powers, economic powers, rule through death. You touched on how they're going to funnel money to Halliburton and similar type of companies. Is there any hope, or how are they going to do this? How are they going to are they going to control through that? You talked about additional aid. Is this all in the form of debt or grants? Okay, and how do we make sure that some of that money doesn't get funneled to the elite, but goes to serve the people? That's one question. The second question is, the money you referred to, the money that we gave. Well, there's tax money, but there's also tens of billions of dollars that we took out of our pockets as contributions. What's happened to that money? Is that being manipulated by the economic powers, or is that being used in a different, more productive way?
Robin?
I was wondering, one of the groups that many of us gave to was Partners in Health, and Paul Farmer. And at one point I read that he was partnering with Bill Clinton as, for the recovery program. What's happened with him? Because he seems to be one of the good guys in all of this, I thought. So has he been pushed aside or what? And I'm sorry I missed the first part of the talk, but I just wondered, is there any chance of Aristide coming back?
Great. Yeah.
The other question I had was about the larger geopolitical context and wondering how Haiti fits into the U.S., let's say, fear about South America and the left turn of South America, and is that connected at all to what's been happening in Haiti?
One more?
Maybe I missed some of this, but for those of us that aren't super aware of the history of Haiti, I'm not sure I got the point of what you think the main reason why the United States, the UN, the Western powers, the World Bank, what the main reason is why they went in there so quick to militarize it, to control it. Is it because of the history of Haiti? Is it because of, is it primarily to funnel money back to Halliburton, et cetera? Or is it primarily to make sure the neoliberal project continues there unabated? I'm not sure I got from either of you what you thought was the main reason why the West was doing this.
That probably is enough to come back to.
Yeah.
So
I'll get a few of those points, and then Kim, you can chime in. When the second coup d'etat in 2004 against Aristide, when they asked John Kerry about what does he think, why he thought this happened, his answer was, these people, talking about the Republican and some of the people in the establishment, have a theological hatred for Haiti. Okay, that can partially address the mindset of some of the elite here about Haiti, and it's been since 1804. It's thanks to Charles Sumner in 1864-65, a United States senator, that Haiti was finally recognized by the United States. 60 years, Haiti was boycotted, sidelined. Even after Haiti helped Bolivar and Miranda gain their independence, the first Latin American conference, America's conference in 1821, Haiti was not invited. So this is the kind of isolation. Haiti was a bad example because of the slavery revolt. You could not countenance a country that are telling Africans that they can be free, that they can govern themselves, and that they do not have to submit to somebody else. And then you have the religion, you have the cultural. So historically that would be it. In terms of now, I wanted to put it in the context of neoliberalism. You know, Haiti has every program that they have tried for Haiti. It's been in terms of free zones and what they call more vulgarly sweatshops. This is an economy where you have the peasantry leaving the land, coming to Port-au-Prince. That's why Port-au-Prince has so many people, so that they can work in sweatshops. After you have dumped agricultural products from the United States, from the agribusiness that the peasants in Haiti cannot compete with. So Haiti has to set itself into this neoliberal program. And the masses of Haiti, and to a point Aristide, were trying to fight this. This is the modern fight. But the background of it, the backdrop of it, like they like to say, is this whole history of Haiti has, not only just friends, but against the United States policy of slavery. So global powers, if I want to extend the global powers to France, I would say that France is the first tormentor of Haiti, of course, because we got our independence from them, and they force Haiti to pay for its independence, which Aristide calculated to be worth $21 billion now. And when Aristide wanted the money back, that was one of the reasons France decided that Aristide had to go. I'll let you say it.
Okay. Let me wrap two. You say the main reasons, ask the main reason why the U.S. and company want to come in and militarize. I think it's both. It goes back to the question of the left turn in Latin America. There's a battle now for the hemisphere. As Roger mentioned, they've taken back Honduras with a coup. They've taken back Chile with an engineered election. And they're now trying to take back Haiti with this military occupation under the guise of relief aid. So it's twofold, the purpose. One is, they're taking back the chessboard piece by piece, country by country, because they're not going to do a sweeping thing, because nobody believes in U.S. imperialism. No, they have to take back the country one by one, the same way Karl Rove would go and pick, states and quadrants and voting zones to pick off. They really study these things, and they look at the map and say, okay, we go here, we go here. But the other one is the financial. At the end of the day, we have a war economy. We are kept alive by these companies from Halliburton, DynCorp, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, etc., which fuel the war machine. That's our principal industry. And in the case of Haiti, our military rolls into action when there's a disaster, because that's what we use, that's what we respond with. The question of Paul Farmer. This is, I talked to Paul Farmer in the hallway at the UN. I've known him for years, and we've had always this sort of, how could I say, slightly gentlemanly polemic, I'll call it. Back in '91, when the first coup took place, I felt at the time that the Haitian people's best response would be an armed struggle response, because it was so clear. Here was this overwhelming popular president with an incredibly vile set of military guys massacring 5,000 people. I mean, there's never been a more clear-cut case of self-defense. And I mean, nobody could defend it. Not even the Bush administration, which helped fund it, could defend it. James Baker came out at the time and said, this coup will not stand. They had no choice. They did it surreptitiously, but they had to disavow it. I mean, of course, they kept supporting it under the table, but and a lot of people say, well, it could never succeed. But it could. At the same time, the Zapatistas had an uprising. Okay, that was, their strategic approach was a little different. They weren't achieving state power, but I think that there could have been a response. Paul Farmer responded to me saying that no, we have to work through the U.S., and in fact, he supported that intervention of the U.S. because as admirable as the work of Partners in Health has been, he in particular, and he is of course the guiding mind behind it, has a very pragmatic approach. We need to get things accomplished on the ground. So I think that he is gambling, and as I said to him in the halls of the UN, I think it's a losing gamble, that somehow we are going to reform the machinery of the U.S. government, of U.S. imperialism, that somehow we are going to enlighten the Bill Clintons and enlighten the Obamas, and we're going to somehow retool. And I think it's a completely mistaken notion. This system has a logic. It functions in a way, and many of you have probably heard Bill Clinton's mea culpas, saying the agricultural policies that I championed during the 90s, which destroyed Haitian agriculture, were the wrong thing. It was a mistake. But to me, that's just so much bluff. That's our two-headed party, the Republicrats. We have the sweet talkers and the tough talkers, and it's presently the sweet talkers in power. And so they tell you what you want to hear, but then they stick it to you in the gut. So I think Paul is an unwittingly being used for this, and they're using his credibility. He kept repeating to me, he said, I'm keeping my day job, I'm ready to bail out. I said, well, now would be the time to bail out. Aristide coming back, I have to say, on the ground in Haiti, everybody criticizes Aristide. His most dedicated supporters will lambast him with critiques. But the fact is, he remains the symbol of popular will. He was the first time since Jean-Jacques Dessalines that the Haitian people got their candidate into power. And so for all his faults and warts, he remains the symbol of Haitian power. And in those refugee camps, in the displaced person camps on the Champ de Mars, all over you would see Aristide's picture pasted on it. And so he remains a kind of a symbol, something that people are looking to attain. Can he be brought back? Right now, it's pretty apparent that the Obama administration wants to keep him out of the hemisphere the same way as the Bush administration did. And I don't see him really trying very hard to get back here. I think this would have been a good occasion to do so, for him to really push somehow to get back, talk to Chavez, talk to whoever he needs to get back. I don't see him doing that, and so I'm not sure that that's really in the cards as much as the people keep that. And
yeah, just I want to jump from the Aristide point and then go back to this gentleman's concern about the history of Haiti. Aristide's problem with the bourgeoisie, the Haitian elite in general, not just the bourgeoisie, even the petty bourgeois in Haiti, resent Aristide. For one thing, they won't say, but I think I've put my finger on this. And even some of my leftist friends, sometimes they fight with me on this. Aristide has been able to tell the people, just like Jesse Jackson tells to African Americans here, I am somebody. Aristide tells the people in Haiti, tout moun se moun, everybody is somebody. You are a human being like everybody else. And when you're talking to a population in a semi-feudal country where people have prejudices of color, where you live, whether you're from the provinces or the capital, whether you're from the rural areas or the urban areas, all kind of layers of prejudices. Some people are not considered people really. Before Aristide, a simple business transaction between somebody who is richer and somebody who is poor is a whole social struggle. You go to a shoe shine boy, you're not satisfied with the way he shined your shoes, you slap him in the head and threaten him and decide not to pay him. Period. This is what he changed. Aristide has many faults, not just errors, many faults. But this is one of his contributions. Most of the people in the masses in Haiti know that they have rights, and they are ready to defend them. They may not know how, they don't have the appropriate organization to do it, but they know they have rights, and they're willing to wait, and they criticize Aristide sometimes because he was lacking in his desire to fight the enemy, especially the last coup d'etat. He had plenty of forces in the streets to say no to the coup d'etat. He decided not to fight. This is where the criticism is coming from. I want to take this and make you understand that I don't mean to say, when I was talking to you about the foreign powers, France, the United States and others, I would be remiss not to mention that part of the Haitian problem is the social structure of Haiti. It's not just the foreign powers. Within Haiti, you have the elite with all those prejudices who exclude the mass from power. And if you take Haiti from the 1860s, 70s to this day, you'll see there is some kind of something going on between the Haitian elite and the foreign powers like France, Germany, United States, where one government is trying to fight the opposition by using the superpowers, by buying a boat, by buying weapons, by inviting them to support a candidate and this and that. This has been very dangerous until 1915 when there was chaos and the United States invaded for the first time. So yes, the foreign powers, because since Haiti became independent, those who had the fathers or mothers as French always felt that tied to Europe and felt superior to the black masses. So you have this thing, this contradiction within Haiti's society. And unfortunately, financial power sometimes is tinged by color. So when you go to Haiti, you may see that most of the people who have are lighter. It's not that all the people who have are lighter, but what will strike you is how many of the people who have are lighter. So you have all this contradiction in the society that makes it become feudal. And Haiti was relegated into being agricultural, or even when they were not doing their own agriculture, peasants from Haiti were encouraged to go to Cuba and Dominican Republic to cut canes. That's from the turn of the 20th century, 1905. 1915, that got even bigger with the United States invading Haiti. So this is what is happening. That's why Haiti has to kept under. Haiti was kept, some government tried to modernize. Haiti was kept into that agricultural mode for the foreign powers, and then now that you have big agribusiness, this agricultural mode doesn't fit anymore. They don't need Haiti to produce anything agriculturally. They need sweatshops. They need cheap labor. So this is what Haiti is in now. You have a weak state, you have NGOs who have more financial power than the government, you have a corrupt elite, you have an intelligentsia that gave up on Haiti. So what do you have? You have popular masses that need to be organized so we can change all that.
That is actually a really good ending point, if that's okay. We're actually at time, and our speakers have given us a lot to think about. I hope people will read Haiti Liberte and check out the radio show also, and maybe talk with our guests informally. But thank you everybody for coming, and thank you so much for our two guests. Goodbye.